It's still morning, so good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and it may feel even more like a morning because it was only yesterday that we changed from winter time to summertime, but I see that looking at the amount of participants here, which is really quite record-breaking, seems that our report has been inspiring reading, as so many of you have come, but I also see that everybody has remembered to change their clocks yesterday, as you're not here an hour late, so great to see you, thank you. So, you already know the context of the European Neighbourhood Policy progress reports. We've done this earlier. I see many familiar faces from last year. Of course, we see each other frequently in between as well. And it is, I think, a good opportunity for us to take stock together with the help of the report on where the country was in 2014, where we are now, and where further action needs to take place, where we are heading. The report, as said, underlines the main developments in last year, so it does not cover the beginning of this year. I would like to underline that, and makes recommendations for this year and probably a bit in the future as well. You will see that very much of what you find in the report focuses on three issues which I've talked about in other fora: the need for more reforms, the need for building broad links within different parts of society and with different parts of society, and moving forward on the Transnistrian conflict. I've defined these already since late last year as the sort of main priorities of the EU's engagement with the Republic of Moldova. I think we can all agree, based on the report, but also based on the experience I and my team, who are represented here, have in this country, that the picture of 2014 was mixed. It was mixed in that on the one hand, we saw two fundamentally important positive developments which have brought our relationship to a completely new level. I'll go chronologically and mention the fact that Moldova became, in a bit less than a year ago, on the 28th of April, the first Eastern Partnership country to achieve visa liberalization for short-term stays in the Schengen area. And the second, and I think structurally more important one, was the signature, ratification and provisional application of the association agreement, including a deep and comprehensive free trade area. I've talked about this agreement as a fundamental framework for reforms, a very important roadmap. If we follow this roadmap, we can really, and with Moldova's own domestic political leadership, the country can be changed to a different track, a track which will take it forward to being a modern, prosperous, growing democracy. But that is only if the reforms are indeed implemented. And I think that this is where we go into the other side of the report, the fact that for the first time since the launch of the ENP, the report on the progress achieved by the Republic of Moldova is rather critical. Only some progress, or limited progress, was achieved in crucial sectors such as justice, combating corruption, media freedom, and banking sector transparency. I think that for the press corps working here, none of this comes as a big surprise. Moldova clearly made less progress than in previous years on deep and sustainable democracy and on the respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Some of the issues reported in the country report deserve special attention, and before going to the recommendations we are making, let me run you through these. There was only minimal progress in the reform of the justice sector and in fighting corruption. I've been talking about this in a number of other fora as well. The government adopted by decree in July a law on judges' disciplinary responsibility and started tackling by this corruption in the justice sector. We welcome the fact that the government found courage to take responsibility for this law, but were equally saddened by the fact that it did not go through the parliament in a normal fashion, because these kind of issues of taking responsibility, assuming responsibility, should be very exceptional cases. No progress, however, was made in reforming the prosecution service. In November 2014, the Ministry of Justice sent the draft of the new prosecution service law to the Venice Commission. We were very happy to see that the law was sent. We have been calling for this for quite a long time. And on the 20th of March, the Venice Commission presented its consolidated opinion. Now, we've studied the opinion, and I think many of you have. There are comments and recommendations, and it's very important that now on the way forward, these recommendations are fully incorporated into the draft law, and that this amended law goes forward without further delay. And we do look forward, and we have heard from the Ministry of Justice commitments that there would be a serious effort to ensure that this law is passed still in the spring session before the Parliament goes on summer recess. I think it's very important that this indeed happens. Some progress was achieved in tackling impunity for ill treatment and torture. Progress could also be noted regarding gender equality, ensuring equal opportunities and inclusion of the Roma people. However, no real progress was achieved in ensuring transparency in media financing and ownership. Besides, there are important institutional and media-related issues which need to be still tackled. There was minimal progress, as we all know, with regard to the Transnistrian conflict. There were only 2 5+2 meetings, and the work of the confidence-building working groups was irregular. Currently, the key issue is the implementation also of the deep and comprehensive free trade area in a manner which will fully benefit Transnistrian economic agents, providing them a level playing field as well. We consider this of extreme importance. There's a need to look into cancelling criminal cases against a number of Transnistrian personalities in order to not have this as a block in the 5+2 process. When I talk about recommendations which we make, I will go a bit to the present day in the Transnistrian settlement process, which does give considerably more rise to optimism than what we saw last year. There is a need to outreach to regions inhabited by national minorities, and in this context, let me underline a need to fully implement the 1994 law on the special autonomous status of Gagauzia. Here you will see in the report that we have taken stock where this process was last year. And finally, and certainly not least, rather I think very much high on the agenda, is that we are very concerned, and this concern started last year but has then carried over the new year, about problems in the banking sector. Large amounts of money, possibly more than 10 billion lei, we don't have the figures, were diverted from 3 Moldovan banks, the Banca de Economii, Banca Sociale and Unibanca, through fraudulent schemes, with the competent authorities failing to act in an efficient enough manner. As emergency loans to the banks have been backed with state guarantees, this may result in a heavy burden for the state in the longer run. We have called, and we continue to call, on the authorities to conduct a thorough investigation and hold those responsible for malfeasance to account. The work of the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry is a good step in the right direction, and it is very important that the scoping mission, the first part of the investigation, which was until now done by Kroll and Associates, that this then leads to the second part, the real investigation. These investigations constitute a very good step in the right direction, but as said, there is still much to be done. A decision must first and foremost be taken on the future of the three banks put under special administration. I would underline that future EU support programs are already put into jeopardy if the problems in the banking sector are not resolved satisfactorily. So, I mean, this is really a very important issue, and we also would urge the government very closely to be in touch, perhaps, and with looking at the economic situation, to put a robust request for negotiations on an IMF program, which will help looking at the macroeconomic fundamentals of the country. I'm not going into the details of an IMF program because I am not a representative of the IMF, so please don't ask me about those. Now let me move to the key recommendations. Some of them have been, some of them represent repetition, issues which have been there for a longer time, which haven't been addressed, still need to be addressed further. The first of these recommendations is a revision of the Constitution to prevent further institutional deadlocks. I think all of us realize that that next year is a year when the term of office of the President of the Republic of Moldova comes to an end, and we remember also from earlier years the repetitions and efforts of trying to elect a president. It is important that thought would be put into how to ensure in a sustainable manner that the political system does not get blocked over this way. It is important to do this kind of a revision of the Constitution in an inclusive manner and take the Venice Commission again fully on board and follow their advice. This is something which we have been saying for many years. There is a need, second recommendation, to continue to improve media freedom by making media ownership more transparent, ensuring the independence of the Audiovisual Coordination Council, and adopting a new audiovisual code. There is work to be done in completing the reform of the Ombudsman, consolidating a system of human rights protection, and ensuring that the National Human Rights Action Plan is implemented fully. The next recommendation will not be a surprise coming from my lips to any of you, and that is really the urgent need to intensify the fight against corruption and focus on corruption prevention, because this is the most important thing if you are to build a society which functions better. It would be particularly important that Moldova reforms the prosecution service and works on judiciary reform in a more concerted fashion and ensures that the National Anti-Corruption Centre and National Integrity Commission are fully independent. We have been calling for this earlier, you know, as well. There is a need, next recommendation, to continue to reform the legal framework for elections in line with recommendations by the OSCE, ODIHR, the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, and the Venice Commission, in particular strengthening campaign finance regulations. Now, I take full note of the fact that a new law on political party financing has been adopted by Parliament. I am not in a position yet at this moment to say anything about the contents of the law. We are still studying. These contents and may have a view then later on. There is a need, furthermore, to make firm progress on justice and law enforcement reform. This will involve consistent and forceful implementation of the justice sector reform strategy and continuing the reform of the Ministry of Interior and other relevant bodies. And here, the Ministry of Interior, as we saw also in the implementation of the Visa Liberalization Action Plan, was one of those bright spots in the overall reform. While much needs still to be done, we were encouraged by processes which had started, and it's very important that those processes continue. There is really an urgent need to eliminate failings in the legal system which allow money laundering and raider attacks on banks and on businesses to take place. Let me note that according to different analyses, up to $18 billion have been laundered through the Moldovan banking system. I think this is a quite humbling figure, also if you compare it to the current problems of the banking sector. There is the need to continue progress on sectoral reforms and bring Moldovan law into line with the EU acquis in order to implement the association agreement and the deep and comprehensive free trade area. We also need to continue raising public awareness and visibility of the merits of the association agreement. At the same time, speaking to all of you, I'll reiterate what I've said earlier. An agreement as such does not bring anything. It is only the implementation of that agreement which brings something. So we need to, in order for us to be able to raise that public awareness, we need to see a very strong commitment to the implementation side of this agreement. There is a need, also linked to the previous recommendation, to intensify efforts to improve the business and investment environment, ensure a level playing field for all economic operators, increase the competitiveness of the Moldovan economy, and counter the shadow economy. And let me just say on the shadow economy, I think we can see from just with our eyesight that there are funds in the Republic of Moldova. If you fight the shadow economy, if you look at tax collection in a sustainable fashion, you will be able to change a lot of the fundamentals of the country on the way forward. And this really needs to be an urgent priority. As regards the business and investment environment, I have spoken on many occasions on the need for fair, equal treatment of businesses. I will never be speaking on behalf of one or other EU company for privileges, but I will be very strongly pushing for equal opportunities for all companies, completely regardless of where their capital comes from, because you need to have a legal framework which works and is implemented. There is a need to provide better public services by deepening and strategically steering the reform of public administration and implementing the decentralization strategy in an inclusive manner. You have seen also in our priorities for assistance in the years to come that public administration reform plays a key role. Now, this reform needs to be really based on a public administration reform strategy, and we are looking forward to seeing a good strategic approach in this regard. There is a need, and I think this is almost an understatement, to take steps to improve corporate governance and oversight of the financial sector. This includes strengthening shareholder transparency. We need to know, the Moldovan public needs to know, the state needs to know who are the real end beneficiaries of the banks, and the national bank's supervisory powers in the banking sector need to be strengthened. these are part of really normal European practices which need to be in place. Then let me move to Transnistria. We are calling for continuing to engage proactively with the Transnistrian side to promote a mutually acceptable vision for a common future and creating conditions enabling the application of the association agreement and the DCFTA on the entire territory of the Republic of Moldova. Now, while last year was in fact a very sad story in the history of the Transnistrian conflict settlement process, here I will put a bit of praise to the new government for having taken this as a priority from day one, for having reached out with a message of generosity, because this is really an important thing for European security as a whole, but also bringing better lives for people living in Moldova, regardless of where they live in Moldova. And here I have been it has been very good that we have seen the first 1+1 meetings between Mr. Osipov and Mr. Stansky. There was a leaders meeting, one which hadn't happened for a long time, between Prime Minister Gaburic and Transnistrian leader Shevchuk. Of course, these are first steps, but this provides a good basis to build on, and this is something the European Union is encouraging and following very closely. There is a need to continue to integrate national minorities. This would include, for us, ratifying the European Charter for regional and minority languages and further developing and implementing a strategy on the integration of national minorities. Here it is very important to work very closely with the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities. And here also some of the first statements of the government have been rather encouraging and positive, but the proof of the pudding is always in the eating. And finally, there is the need to adopt the necessary measures to fully implement the new education code and start to implement the vocational education and training restructuring plan. This is also a field which we are very strongly supporting. Now, I've spoken for nearly half an hour, given a quite sort of long presentation on the main issues of the report, also deviating a little bit to things where we are sending messages which we are following, now taking us a bit from 2014 also to the current year, 2015. I'll stop here. We have time, so I look forward to a more interactive continuation of our meeting with your questions, and I will try to give the best possible I'll try to answer the best I can. You have also received in your folders copies of the report, and of the press memo, which basically puts this all into a more compact, puts it into a compact package for easy use. You will also find courtesy translations into Romanian and into Russian, and I think that you have them out there or in your folders. So, thank you very much.
Anișoara, ultim frontele. Domnul ambasador, știu că v-ați referit puțin la situația celor trei bănci, dar vreau încă un pic să mai vorbim despre asta, și anume despre faptul cum s-a putut dintr-o țară puternică și săracă de atâtea miliarde. Și până la urmă nimeni nu știa, autoritățile nu răspund la nicio întrebare oficială. Noi aflăm de la experți, de la deputați din opoziție, că există hotărâri secrete de guvern în care se alocă miliarde de lei pentru salvarea acestor bănci. Cum credeți ce trebuie autoritățile să facă în acest moment pentru a salva băncile?
Well, there are many ways forward on that. I'm afraid that I will not have an answer to you on how is it possible to steal so much money from a small country. I think I said in my comments that now is the time for a really thorough investigation and to bring people to justice, to try to recover what can be recovered, and to look structurally and ensure that this could never happen again. There are different things which could be done with the banks. Most likely, the way forward would involve liquidating these banks while transferring deposits and guaranteeing, and this is a very important thing, that no Moldovan citizen will suffer from this step, and that in fact this step would mean a cleaning up of the fundamentals and would mean more predictability for Moldovan depositors. So if you hear words about liquidating the banks, this doesn't mean that people would lose their money. This means that badly governed institutions would no longer be there. So this is one way forward. There's a lot of expert advice there, and you have seen some of our jointly agreed positions in the briefing book done to the government by the donor community, and those are based on best international practices. But it is important to deal with these three banks in a resolute manner. There is not much time. This needs to be done fast, and it's important that there is political will to do that.
Господин Косов.
Да.
Владимир Соловьев, Ньюсмейкер. У меня два вопроса. Первый. Хотелось бы услышать позицию представителей Евросоюза по поводу заключенных Камерберга и Григорчука, которых уже 5 месяцев держат по непонятным и все время обновляемым обвинениям, меняющимся обвинениям. Это первое. Второе. Недавно мы наблюдали за тем, как в одной не чужой вам стране, на Украине, был уволен олигарх Коломойский с должности главы областной администрации Днепропетровской области. Там было в ходе увольнения были звонки премьер-министру Яценюку, вице-президента США Джо Байдена, была встреча посла США с самим Коломойским. Так вот, я хотел спросить, не настало ли время каких-то более активных шагов западных дипломатов в случае с молдавскими олигархами, с их влиянием на власть? Может быть, уже пора как-то активизироваться на этом направлении? Спасибо.
Volodya, thank you for your questions. On the first one, I think, in fact, our position is quite clear through the report, ENP Progress Report as such. I mean, you see that we said clearly that there was less progress than earlier on consolidation of democracy, and knowing EU speak, this is not necessarily a very positive and is a considerably more critical statement than earlier. One of the things where the report makes very clear reference to, there are three things. One was the deregistration of a political party 3 days or a couple of days before the vote. Secondly, we had the issue of a political party running in the elections, a clone party, regardless of the fact that it had in fact, by a court decree, being removed from the race, or there had been a recommendation to remove. And the third issue was the opening of criminal cases which have raised questions against certain supporters of the Patria Party, and the cases you are mentioning are covered by this. We're following the issue closely. As I've said already at an earlier stage when asked about this, when you have criminal cases, you need to have a judicial process which is not drawn too much forward, where evidence is presented in an open and transparent manner, and where you get to a resolution or where a trial has a beginning date and an end date, and there is trust in the judiciary process. I cannot go further in commenting this, but I am not sure that these elements are present in this case. As regards, I'm not going to comment Kolomoisky and Ukraine. I'll leave that to my colleague Jan Tombinsky in Kiev. We have said very clearly that there is a problem with the amount of vested interests underpinning Moldovan politics. I've said that in many interviews, and I think that you have taken some of them from me. And you've certainly pushed me to say that, but what we are looking at is through transparency, through structural reform, and through the consolidation of these, what sometimes look as rather bureaucratic formulations in the association agreement and elsewhere, we are working to encourage the Republic of Moldova to play by the rules, not with the rules, and come close to European standards of democracy. And it is quite clear that the more transparent your political system is, the more accountable your political system is, the less space there will be for vested interests as well. This is a transition process. I'd say that the case of Ukraine is probably a little bit different, but I'm not saying that we wouldn't be concerned over the underlying structures which you see in many parts of the political system here. We have not hid that concern at any stage. But this is precisely what you need to address, not by one or other sort of quick move or statement, but in a very patient process of looking at the fundamentals of the political system. And this is what, in reality, if you read the association agreements, if you look at the underlying assumptions of the Eastern Partnership and the European Neighbourhood Policy, that is in fact what the Republic of Moldova has committed herself to doing.
Și vreau să vă întreb, când o să pleacă de la lucrurile reale la limitația de lucruri în sportul de luptă și dacă puteți face ceva ca să aduceți perspectivele acest mesaj politicii deci în federațiile de luptă, în asociațiile de luptă, nu trebuie să aibă loc luptele dedicate care duc la traumatizarea corpului, ci la imitația luptei.
Well, I must, and you must forgive me in that as I'm a rather peaceful person, I'm not somebody who really watches fighting sports very much, so maybe there is part of this discussion which has gone past me at some stage, but and I'm afraid I don't have a very developed answer for you at that stage. I think that one of the things which any diplomat should be able to do when he doesn't have an answer is to be able to say, I do not know this field and I don't know.
Sofia Obada, Journal TV. Mr. Ambassador, due to the limited progress in judiciary, how will this affect the financial support from the European Union? Will be cutting in the future?
If you look at the financial support of the European Union, I'd say that there are two elements at this moment. I'll first talk about the performance-based elements, and you've heard me talk about the future of our justice sector budget support tranches. We are not yet at the stage where we would do a evaluation on where we are. And the law on the prosecution service is a key issue in this. This is something which we need to see, does it get really adopted by a certain date? what is going to happen in the implementation of the law, what's going to happen with addressing problems which you see in the functioning of anti-corruption measures, such as, for instance, the random distribution of cases in courts. Where will we be in looking at integrity testing in a sort of more writ large? And then based on that, we can see to which extent the next tranche is going to be possible or not. I've said it that if there is no progress, there will not be a tranche. But we're not there at this moment with evaluating the basic preconditions for such a tranche to be paid. You saw that in the last tranche we cut 1.8 million from the tranche, and this money is not recoverable, it's gone. And this is a very important thing to realize as well, because I think I was misquoted in one of the media saying that there would be a possibility to get that funding, to recover that funding, and I want to make it clear that that this is not the case. Now, another thing which will affect our budget support payments, and we had a director from DG NEA last week looking at funding, and he gave a press conference together with the Prime Minister. We were all there. And one of the messages which came across as well is, while we're very committed to supporting the Republic of Moldova in reforms coming closer, for instance, for budget support payments, one of the key issues is macroeconomic stability and where you are in terms of macroeconomic fundamentals and the transparency of the budgetary process. The cost of the banking sector is relatively high. We certainly have to see that these issues are tackled in an efficient manner. We have, on the stability issue, underlined that it would be very good if the government would ask for negotiations on an IMF program, for instance. And then there are other issues, sort of completely aside, where we are, which may be tackled with the IMF or not. That's not for me to say, but is what to do with these banks and how to build guarantees into the system that that the transparency of the budgetary system is such that our funding goes really, our budget support goes really to what this budget support is needed for. And that's reforms, that's taking this country forward, that's doing a lot of these very important things which are needed for the association agreement, which means that without that transparency which I'm talking about, if there would be any risk that money of European taxpayers, and I know many of these taxpayers myself, I mean, I'm accountable to them. They are single mothers, they're not wealthy people whose tax money goes because we have seen it and they agree that helping the Republic of Moldova develop towards European standards of life is something worthwhile supporting. But if there would be a risk that any of this funding could end up basically indirectly going into the pockets of those who have caused problems in the banking sector and who have taken money from the banks as part of a support program, and these issues are not dealt with, then of course we have a serious accountability problem which can affect also the basis of being able to disperse especially budgetary support.
The chief of the delegation of the European Parliament to the Association Commission said that this report, this time of repetitive scene in Chisinau was very alarming, and the Republic of Moldova doesn't have enough time, much time to implement these reforms. So we would like to ask, I would like to ask if this is like an ultimatum for the authorities of Republic of Moldova, and how much time do our authorities have given by the European authorities?
Well, first of all, we don't deal in ultimatums. I suppose there are other players in the geopolitical field who prefer ultimatums. We don't. So let's start from that viewpoint. But fundamentally, when you have a country to run, as any government will, and as any parliament will, and as any political leadership will, you are doing reforms and you're addressing issues not for the European Union, not for an external player, but for your own citizens and for your own self. We see problems. Yes, the tone is more critical than it has been earlier. There is a serious need to address these problems in order to bring the country forward and in order to guarantee the kind of development Moldovan citizens expect and and the kind of development they deserve. Of course, a situation where the economic fundamentals are in danger, that kind of a situation is very brittle for any country. And this is a further argument to address things without any delay. I don't think it's very productive to think how much time there is. If you have a problem, if you have a challenge, my standard answer is, and that's what we've seen also in terms of economic problems inside the European Union with certain countries, normally if you're in a situation where there are serious concerns, the answer is no, you don't have time. You just better roll your sleeves up and do it and take care of it. But that is not up to me to tell the Moldovan government what to do. I can advise as a partner, and my advice, our advice as the European Union, our encouragement would be to act fast, resolutely, in good faith, to really address the real problems at hand.
Dorina Gheorghanov, TVR. Domnule ambasador, autoritățile de la Tiraspol au spus că negocierile în formatul 5+2 ar putea fi puse în pericol, deoarece autoritățile de la Chișinău ar deschide dosare penale importatorilor din regiune. În ce măsură poate fi monitorizat mediul de afaceri, fără ca să fie afectate negocierile și mediul politic? Mulțumesc!
Well, I think that there are certain logics, and some logics are logics of conflict resolution and bringing things forward. And I think, and we think, that it is very important to look at things in the logic of the process and try rather through positive incentives, reaching out to build common interests between the two banks rather than to use coercive measures. And I would hope that the change in tone, which we see in the 5+2 process at this moment, will especially send a strong message that the way we do business is changing. We're trying to build trust, we're trying to build confidence, we know where we want to go, which is a rules-based existence, but we need to do that hearing each other and trying to look at common interests and not use coercive tactics, and that goes for either side. I take note of that, and certainly if I see, and if we see, the use of extreme violence we will always intervene in that and speak against that. And then, Anthony.
Domnule ambasador, în recomandările pe care se conțin în finalul acestui raport se vorbește și despre decentralizare, reforma administrației publice locale. Vreau să vă întreb, care este opinia delegației Uniunii Europene vis-a-vis de propunerile de amânare a alegerilor locale, care ar trebui să aibă loc cel târziu în toamnă, pentru o dată mai târzie. Uniunea Europeană cum va aprecia o eventuală decizie, modificarea legislației pentru amânarea alegerilor cu o jumătate de an sau un an? Asta ar fi prima întrebare. Și a doua întrebare ce ține de drepturile omului, democrației și drepturile la întrunire. Va fi sau nu va fi taxată de către Uniunea Europeană intenția de a monopoliza sau de a limita înregistrarea noilor partide prin, spre exemplu, înregistrarea mărcilor comerciale ale partidelor? Știți că acum există o colizie în acest sens, că nu se mai poate practic de înregistrat partide pentru că mărcile comerciale au fost deja monopolizate de către cineva. Mulțumesc!
Thank you. I'll start with the latter question. I once jokingly said that looking at how much the word European has been used in different ways, maybe the delegation should try to take a trademark and regulate its use. But that was that more sort of as a joke. Now, there are overall European practices, and I have the trademark for the word. There are overall European practices on party registration, and I think they vary from country to country, and I think it would be important to look at these practices, look at the basic tones. There are questions, of course, and one of the things where we spoke against was clone parties in the run-up to the elections, and there I think there are questions when the similarities between names of parties and symbolisms of parties are too big. At the same time, my understanding pretty much is, looking at the experience of those countries where I know experience, that a political party can be registered, but if that party doesn't get elected for a while or something like that, in a way it loses its registration and so on. But it is important to look at rules by which you can function rather than rules with which you can play. And I think that this is a important feature to look at in this context as well. There are certain cases, and every case needs to be looked at separately. There are certain, and I really would look rather, and we haven't done that in close context, would look rather at European practices and what could sort of constitute certain changes. As regards decentralization and possible, let's say, delaying of the local elections, democracy is democracy, laws are laws, and you can't just change them basically because it suits you at a certain stage. No law on political arrangements should ever be changed for the reason of tactics. These need to be strategic decisions. At the same time, I would urge, especially with fiscal decentralization there, I would urge to move forward, but completely as a separate issue, with territorial administrative reform of the country. And this is something which many European or many EU member states have been dealing with as well. We looked recently at statistics, and if you look at the amount of mayoralties in the Republic of Moldova, and you're above, I think, you're at a very, very high number compared to the citizenry of the country, you realize that this system can provide leadership positions to one or other person, but can this system deliver what is the most fundamental thing? Can it deliver services to the population? We know of mayoralties where you have on the payroll one or two people, but that's the whole budget of the mayoralty in question. So there is a need to combine fiscal decentralization for the sake of the citizen with rationalization and territorial administrative reform. I know it from other EU member states that if you want to be able to serve your citizens, there is only an infinite amount of funds and money and tax money available. And from that tax money, you need to be able to deliver. You need to be able to do your fundamental job, which is not having an office, but which is in fact producing something, delivering something. And here the need for rather dramatic territorial administrative reform would be needed. There has been quite a bit of regret from the side of some members of the donor community, of the international community, who had committed funds to precisely looking at fiscal decentralization, that an earlier promise or an earlier commitment on doing these things in parallel, which should have been started already a long time ago, were not done through, and some have suspected that there may have been electoral reasons for that or not, but it is important to have a proper discussion on what territorial administrative reform means, how should it be done in a way, and this is part of the public administration reform, how is it done in a way where the citizens get better education, better health care, social services, which need to be provided by in the country, and this and that will require quite a bit of optimization. But it's a small country; the distances are not big. So, so in fact, this should be an easy country to do that with the right political will, with good results. But this is a very serious reform, and I don't quite feel comfortable with the link being made. Should we have local elections when they're supposed to take place, or should we do territorial administrative reform, and these being presented as alternatives? Consolidating democracy is one thing, and consolidating the way the country is governed and bringing better services to the population, that's another thing. They are linked, but it is important that they are not sort of packaged in an artificial manner.
Domnule ambasador, mâine în ședința secretă a Guvernului a fost aprobată o decizie de a acorda încă 6 miliarde de lei băncii de economii. Vreau să vă întreb dacă știți despre aceasta și cum comentați.
I don't know about the secret meeting of the government on Friday. Maybe something has passed my attention. I'm not a member of the government, so I certainly would not have sat in a secret meeting, so no, I can't comment on it. It is important, however, to ensure, and this I will say, as I've said already earlier, that no time is wasted on solving the banking issue, and that the necessary measures are taken that the country's economy stays afloat in this situation. But as said, we need, it is important to have a structured, strategic approach to doing this.
Dacă îmi permiteți, eu aș mai avea două întrebări. În campania electorală de anul trecut, mai mulți politicieni anunțau tare la noi că 2015 Republica Moldova va depune cerere de aderare la Uniunea Europeană. Acum s-au răzgândit Vrem să vă întrebăm dacă este gata Moldova să depună cerere de aderare în 2015 și ce presupune această pregătire. Și a doua întrebare, vreau să vă întreb despre premierul Kiril Gaburi. Știu că nu veți spune ca direct, dar dacă ar fi fost o situație similară în Uniunea Europeană, când în CV-ul premierului apar neclarități, cum s-ar fi reacționat acolo? Și dacă finii premierului ar ajunge în consiliere, acolo ar fi conflict de interese sau nu?
On the second, there are basically two questions. One was on the Prime Minister's CV. The second one was on membership applications. And I think I'll start with the Prime Minister's CV to get the more delicate question, I suppose, off the table first. The other one I have such a standard reply to that you've already, that I can just put basically, I suppose, a tape on and repeat it. If you think that we haven't had inside the European Union questions about the educational, of the CV or education diplomas of politicians, you've had them in many European member states, and somehow, in most cases, the politicians have then come clean with their situation, and it has been discussed, and you move forward because fundamentally you are trying to evaluate a prime minister from the state, from how he is doing his job and how he is following the rules of that job. But I think clarity is always a good way forward. I don't know, I'm not privy to all information here, so I shan't comment it. I will just say, as you asked about the European situation, I think it's very case by case. It handles, it's the demonstration of how you handle a situation. How you handle a situation will determine how you get out of it. I've seen it happen both ways, and some very good politicians have had certain problems with their CVs, I think, later on. As regards family members or former business partners or others in the group of your advisors, if you look at the US political system or many European political systems, I think there is nothing new about this. There have been family members as advisors. There have been former associates as advisors, because fundamentally it's very much a question of whom you trust. It's a question of building your own team, and I would say rather that where there would be a conflict of interest would be between two elements. On the one side, if you have I mean, let's look at the division of powers in a way. Within political life, you are representing politics, not administration, in that much. Prime Minister is a politician to ensure political leadership over the government. In that kind of a case, if you look at the team members, the advisors who are around you, they're usually there temporarily for the duration of the government to support what you are doing as your job. But then you have a civil service, which is supposed to be professional, which is supposed to be a strong civil service, supposed to be a counterweight in a way. I wouldn't say a counterweight to the government, but represents continuity, impartiality. Members of the civil service can be members of political parties, but for instance, their political party affiliations cannot have any influence on the way they work because they work as professionals under the government leadership. If a politician, let's say a minister, would have a family member inside that same ministry, or if you would see that people get promoted within the civil service at a time when a family member is there to have political responsibility, that would be a problem. So, as advisor, I don't necessarily see a conflict of interest, but what would be called nepotism in sort of influencing the civil service in favor of your family members or others, now that would be a problem, because the civil service needs to be independent. And this, I think, is this is a differentiation which I would make between that team which helps you carry a political job, and here I think in many transition societies in the former Soviet Union, one of the big problems which I see is that for some funny reason, members of the cabinet of ministers are often considered civil servants. They need to put down, based on the constitution, their parliamentary mandates, and they are governed by civil service law. But fundamentally, ministers are politicians. They are not professionals, and they should not be professionals. They should be, on behalf of the governing coalition, exerting political control over a civil service, which then again delivers a good quality. So, I mean, I would keep that differentiation. Now, as regards a membership application, I'll press play because I think I've given this answer. In psychology, there's a very good saying that you should focus on the here and now. We have just last year signed, ratified, and started to implement an association agreement and a deep and comprehensive free trade area. You look at the ENP progress report, you look at concerns on justice sector, on the level playing field. You note that certain things have been taken, certain laws have been passed, but we have questions still on implementation. You look at this sort of enormous roadmap, which in fact means taking on board a number of things from the EU acquis. That's on the table. This is what we need to focus on. You look at this is what's key. Now, and this is what's key. And if those reforms are take place, if the association agreement is really implemented, you will have a completely different software on where you're going with democracy, with governance, how the market economy functions, how the institutions function. And then you will be already much closer to the European Union. The association agreement does not rule out eventual decisions which would go to a more integrative step. It says very clearly that this does not prejudge future developments, but it is separate from that, and it's what we have on the table now. And it is through the implementation of this agreement that we really genuinely become closer to each other. So let's focus now on what needs to be done now, which is implementing and getting the benefit out of this agreement. And I think that by doing that successfully, the Republic of Moldova will also be capable of demonstrating preparedness to move even further, provided she wants to, and provided that there is consensus in society to do so. But first you need to do the hard work.
Mr. Ambassador, Ilya Chan from the Government newspaper. I'm glad to see that in this report you included the problem of media owners. I want to ask you to give us more details about what the problem is and some solutions that you see.
Well,
for example, in me, I see a problem to solve a solution for this problem, to finance the institutions that should be independent, that can investigate the problem of media owners?
Of the investigative media ownership. I think that one of the major things is to get legislation in place which makes it obligatory to declare openly to whom a certain media outlet belongs. Media is a business in many places, and if you look at, for instance, the US media environment or other media environment, if it is clear who owns the media, so in that case you also have different approaches. I mean, there are political party affiliated media. That's normal, that's okay, it happens as well, but then people know that this is not going to be an objective view, this is a view which is representing something. If media outlets are run like businesses, then the businessman, the investor, will look at the quality of the product, look at what the demand is, and I think people are relatively mature as creatures, we all are, and what we want is to be respected by being given objective information. But if, let's say, large parts and the majority of the media ownership is non-transparent, if there are vested interests behind that, and if there is not enough clarity to the population on whose interest this media is looking at and what is the bias you get in there, then that leads to manipulation of public views and so on and so forth. So I think that the main thing is to have really very big clarity on whom this media belongs to, and that's also a way of getting to a more level playing field as regards media, because then the market mechanism of people demanding more independent media sources also go up when the picture is transparent.
My second question is also connected to the media, but it's not connected to the report. As far as I know, the European Union is planning to open some, media institution to counter offensive. The Russian media offensive. In the last while, the Russian media is pretty offensive, and
Yes.
It also includes the Republic of Moldova. I think you saw the situation with Gagauzia, how they presented it. So, if the European Union is planning to open a media institution in Moldova to defend against the Russian media attack, will that include the Republic of Moldova?
First of all, there is no sort of EU plan on doing that. There are some contacts between groups of member states wanting to look at a more regional channel which would bring objective information. I don't like the word counter-offensive because it is against our values to use media as a weapon. Propaganda is against our values, but objective information is in line with our values. And it is clear, unfortunately, that there is a thought-through narrative, very propagandistic, and which twists reality coming from the Russian media into this region. And it is very important, I think, that there is an effort, and I would say first and foremost through independent media in this region, to offer objective information, not a counter-propaganda, but to offer those facts which will help people in building their own views. Of course, it's very difficult at times when you have a media which is well financed and which is fundamentally getting its attractiveness not that much from news, but from entertainment and high-level entertainment content, and then people stay on for the news and get a very one-sided view. And it's a very complex issue of trying to balance that with something more real, a more objective content, because it's also getting that market share will not be easy. But I think it needs to be done in all forms. The best way to fight propaganda is through honesty, objectivity, and not trying to sort of, somebody paints things black and the other one paints them then white in order to counter the black, but tries to have a more nuanced view. I do think that if somebody will do regional efforts, I'm sure that the Republic of Moldova will certainly be covered by them, but I can't say that the EU as such is committed to as a group of 28 is committed to that, but I know that there are a number of initiatives around. Further questions? If not, I think you've listened to my voice for such a long time that I think you all deserve a coffee, which is next door. So, mulțumesc, spasiba, дякую. I'll quickly.